Bezrat Hashem, the learning this week should be l'refuat Morenu v'Rabbeinu Harav Menachem Yoshua ben Yair Eisenstock v'achola Shlomit bat Chaya betoch kol shar cholei Yisrael. When we enter in to Parashat Vayakhel and we start the building of the Mishkan, there are two questions in the beginning of the parsha that I think could connect together. In the ending of the last parsha before Vayakhel, there's a very interesting parsha. It's the parsha of Moshe covering his face. And the psukim say, Vayechal Moshe midaber itam. Moshe stops talking to them. Vayiten al panav masveh. Moshe covers his face from the world, from the reality, and from the people. And so if I look at Moshe at the end of Parashat Kitisa, I would think that the ideal is to cover yourself from the world. Vayiten al panav masveh. But only 3 psukim later, in Parashat Vayakhel, we say, Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael vayomer elehem. So wait. A second ago, we said that Moshe covers his face. That Moshe prevents himself from the world and he takes himself away from Am Yisrael. And a second later, Vayakhel Moshe, he brings everyone together. And he's standing there with Am Yisrael speaking to them. And these two things stand one next to another. So is the ideal to have a masveh, to separate yourself from reality? Or is the ideal Vayakhel Moshe, to be with everyone? And the second question comes from Rashi. The first word in Parashat Vayakhel is Vayakhel Moshe. Says Rashi beautifully, Hu lishon hef'il. He says the word Vayakhel is lishon hef'il. what does it mean? She'eino osef anashim bayadayim. Not that Moshe came and took people brought them. Elahen esafin al pi diburo. Meaning the word Vayakhel means that Am Yisrael came from themselves, and not that Moshe himself brought Am Yisrael. And so says the Sefat Emet in 1886, מקודם כתיב Parashat המסוה. First we have the parsha of Moshe covering his face. אחר כך Vayakhel Moshe. So we first have separating, putting a cover on your face, and right after Vayakhel Moshe, they all come together. So says the Sefat Emet, what is the idea behind this? So he explains that the idea of the masveh was that, he says, Ach Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom zachar lihishaer b'ma'ala harishona v'zika et kol b'nei Yisrael. He says that Moshe Rabbeinu stayed through the masveh on Har Sinai. What is the Sefat Emet saying? The Sefat Emet is saying that Moshe Rabbeinu stays in the spiritual realm. That Moshe Rabbeinu, why does he put a masveh on his face? Moshe says, I am staying on Ma'amad Har Sinai. And Ma'amad Har Sinai is the opposite of the reality. It's that the whole reality crumbles down. Is that God speaks and the world is destroyed. And Moshe stays there. Moshe puts the masveh on his face because he's able to stay on Ma'amad Har Sinai. But then he says, what is the idea of Vayakhel Moshe and the building of the Mishkan? So says the Sefat Emet, להראות, to teach us, to show us, כי אי אפשר להתחתונים לבוא לתיקון הראוי רק באמצעות הטבע. The Sefat Emet says, what is the idea of Vayakhel Moshe? The only way Am Yisrael could fix the world is not through Ma'amad Har Sinai, is through the teva. And it's so deep. If we look into the Mishkan from beginning to end, it's all about physicality. You walk into Beit HaMikdash, you do not hear God's voice. You hear animals. In the Chatzer, there are cows, there are sheep, there are birds. You look at the Mishkan, you see gold, copper, silver. It's all about physicality. And so the Mishkan says the opposite of Matan Torah. In Matan Torah, there is no reality. There is no physicality. It's all about spiritual. It's God talking and us becoming under God. But the Mishkan is the total opposite. So Moshe Rabbeinu stays on Har Sinai. And by doing so, says the Sefat Emet, what does Rashi mean when he says that he didn't take them, but they came from themselves? So explains the Sefat Emet, שהוא כלל הצריך לפרט. כאשר בני ישראל לא היו יכולים להישאר במדרגה הראשונה, ומשה רבינו עליו השלום לקח לו האוהל. על ידי זה לעתים כשבני ישראל באים אל האחדות, אז מוריש להם משה רבינו את התורה. Says the Sefat Emet, what is Rashi saying? That Am Yisrael was able to build the Mishkan on their own. He explains that by Moshe staying on Har Sinai, that itself enabled Am Yisrael to fix through the reality of the physical world. That Moshe Rabbeinu took upon himself to separate, to put the masveh. And by doing so, he didn't really separate. Because we see that once he does that, Am Yisrael the minute later are able to build the Mishkan. So by Moshe separating, he's enabling Am Yisrael to fix not only through spiritual realms, but through physical realms. But what's behind this idea? I think that if we think about it, Moshe Rabbeinu is saying the ideal is the Mishkan. The ideal is to fix through the reality. But if you don't have Ma'amad Har Sinai, then you don't really have a way to relate to the reality. You need Ma'amad Har Sinai so that you're not lost when you're dealing with the world. But that means that the ideal is the world. That the ideal of the Mishkan is to say, why is there gold? Why is there copper? Why is there silver in the world? Because that is how you bring God into the world. And it was incredible. I had an amazing zchut today to start preparing myself for my son Oritan's birthday in 28 days. And I was thinking to myself, for his third birthday, what do I want to give him? And so I went to the mall, Kenyon Malcha, and I bought him this beautiful pair of tzitzit that it has a little train and it says, Ani ben shalosh. And I decided that I wanted to have tchelet on this tzitzit. And I said, you know, I could go to the store, I could buy it. But no, I want to sit down and I want to tie it myself. And I sat down today for around 3 hours to tie the first 2 knots in this tzitzit with tchelet. And if you think about it, in those 3 hours, I could have learned 4 daf in Masechet Eruvin. And instead, I'm sitting there tying the blue over the white, getting all mixed up. And before I made that first knot, I had so many tears in my eyes. Because I said I have the ability through my hands to make an action that will be on my son every single day. And I totally felt that the ability to fix through reality, to bring Ma'amad Har Sinai, that Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one who could truly continue. But he separated himself to give me, thousands of years later, the ability to, with my hands, bring Ma'amad Har Sinai into those strings, onto that piece of clothing. And I think one more place that I saw this idea so strong was one of my students. in Yeshivat Otniel, Reb Kalman. About a year ago, he came out to me and he said, Yair, I have a lot of ideas, but I want to learn something new. So I said to him, Kalman, let's learn together to be a sofer stam. And watching him day after day learning how to be a sofer showed me something incredible about him personally, but about the world in general. I watched him learn each letter, take the time to put the ink on to the cloth, and to put it in the right way, in the exact way. And through his ability to start learning a physical way to bring God into the world, I could honestly say, and I think he could say the same, that totally changed him. If we go back to the question, we said, why is the parsha of the masve, of which seems like separate yourself from physicality of the world, right next to Vayakhel Moshe to build the Mishkan, which is only about physicality? Explains the Sefat Emet. Moshe brought the Torah down from God, but he did not finish the process. He enabled the Torah to come into the world, but only people, through writing Sifrei Torah, through tying tzitzit, through cleaning dishes in your house, through cooking food for Shabbos, that is the Mishkan. And Moshe, with his Mesirut Nefesh, taught us the biggest lesson. He taught us that through the physical world, we have the ability to not only think Torah, but to live Torah. Not only to talk about concepts, but to bring them into day-to-day life. B'ezrat Hashem, we should all be zocheh to remember that Moshe Rabbeinu covered himself from the reality not as the ideal, but by doing that, right away Am Yisrael understood, if Moshe brought the Torah, the next step is building the Mishkan. The next step is not to separate, but to take the Torah and relate it to every physical aspect in the world, just like in the Mishkan. Shabbat Shalom.